Hey there, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast, the show that's all about helping photographers just like you build a thriving business without sacrificing your sanity. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, a former teacher turned full-time photographer and marketing coach, here to fill your earbuds each week with practical tips, real-life stories, and a whole lot of encouragement. So if you're ready to dive in, let's get to it because this girl means business. Hey friend, okay, I have a question for you, and it's probably one that you've heard before, but I'm going to ask you this question and then we're going to talk all about it. So the question is, what would you do differently in your business if you knew you couldn't fail? Now, again, you've probably heard that question before. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? But I want to really dive into this topic of failure and the fear of failure, because it holds us back so much in our business. There are so many things that I think we don't even realize we're doing it anymore, but we are sort of self-sabotaging. And I say this from very personal experience. This is one of these topics where it's like, I'm not saying this to you having already come through this. I'm saying this to you going through this because it's a never-ending struggle and a battle to overcome this idea of, but what if it fails? There are so many things that go through my head on a daily basis. I'm very much an idea person. I have constant ideas of what if this and what if that, and let's try this and let's try that. But then very few of them actually make it out of the idea phase because something comes in the way. And typically it is fear of failure, but manifesting itself in a variety of ways. And this example I want to give you is not photography related, but I thought it was really funny because it kind of sparked the idea for this episode. So a couple weeks ago, again, I'm always coming up with like crazy Shark Tank business ideas. So a couple weeks ago, two things happened that kind of gave me a random business idea. One is I was watching the news and they were doing this news story on, there's a local park that's on a lake not far from me. And they had these really cute little like one bedroom cabins for a while that they would you could rent out. They were part of a campsite that you could rent out. And they were selling off these cabins because they just were not renting them enough. I don't know exactly the reason why, but they were selling them off for really reasonably priced. You just had to basically have a way to move it to wherever you were going to place it at. And I remember thinking they were kind of set up in a really cute little semicircle. And I was like, oh, those are so cute. There's got to be some really cool thing you could do with these cabins. Well, then fast forward a few days later and I am scrolling through social media and I come across this video of these two women chatting, and they were talking about their ideal girls' night. They were like, well, my ideal girls' night is going out and getting dressed up and going to dinner. But there's just so much that goes into all of that. You got to find a sitter, or if you have to make sure it matches your husband's schedule, or, and then you have the thing of if you're going to go out and you're going to have drinks, you got to drive home. There's all these things. So then the other one's yeah, I really prefer to stay home. She's for those reasons, I love a good girls' night in. And it's just you can be comfortable and you can be cozy and everybody can just be relaxed and you don't have the pressure of, there's a waiter asking you questions and there's people wanting your table. You just get to have this chill girls' night. But most of her friends, she was all of my friends have kids or spouses. And so trying to find someone's house that we can go to for a night and kick everybody out of is difficult. So between those two news-ish stories, I concocted this crazy idea of ooh, what if I bought those cabins and I created a girls' night experience place where instead of renting an Airbnb for a whole night, you get to rent a cabin for 4 hours. And we have a central area where someone cooks meals and they cater different food to the cabins. You could bring in your own wine or alcohol. You could have a fire pit outside. You could make each cabin really fun themes. One could be a Taylor Swift themed cabin, or one could be a super old Hollywood cabin, or I don't know. I was going off on all these crazy ideas. And I was telling my husband about it. And he was like, yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's a cool idea. And I'm telling my friends about it, and they were all like, oh my God, that would be awesome. We would totally book one of those. And then I started having all of the like thoughts of why it wouldn't work, why it was going to fail. Well, it would cost this much. You'd have to do this, and you'd have to have this many people. Like, I went through all of those things. And yes, you have to, if you're actually going to turn something into a business, you have to have the logistics behind it. But I immediately went to, in my mind, after the excitement of this is a really fun idea, to all the reasons that it probably wasn't going to work. And that alone, along with the fact that like I really have no intention of opening a girls' night cabin adventure restaurant situation, is that I was afraid of it failing. And I've done this in my business so many times, of come up with an idea and then almost immediately, come up with all the reasons why it won't work. And I see this being replayed back to me in the people that I work with, in the clients that I have, in the coaching sessions that I do, where I will present an idea to somebody and I will say, hey, what if you try X, Y, or Z? And their immediate response is to give me all the reasons why it won't work. And I think that when you really come down and you break it down to why do we do that, it's because we're trying to protect ourselves from the failure. But what I want to look at today is, what exactly is failure and why are we afraid of it? Because is it really as bad as we think it is? And I say that to say that, like, yes, failure in these grand, big, gigantic scheme of things, when they're massive failures, they can be devastating in a lot of ways, financially, emotionally. It can, ruin relationships, all those things. I get that. I'm not talking about those massive failures. I'm talking about things like you put out a Black Friday sale and nobody buys it. You launch a mini session and nobody signs up for it. I'm talking about those kinds of failures. So let's talk about like the idea of reframing what failure is. I think that we all look at failure as this big catastrophic thing that means that we personally are no good. We tie our success and our failures to our own selves. Again, I say this as we collectively because I do this too. So I'm speaking to myself when I say this. I get this. This is like self-therapy right now that I'm doing here. So just bear with me. Failure is not a reflection on you as a person. Okay, these little failures of, I put this thing out in the world and it didn't work. I launched this program and it didn't sell. I had an idea and I put it out there and it just didn't quite go the way I thought it would. I put out my mini sessions and nobody booked them. That is not a reflection on you. People weren't booking your mini sessions because they don't like you. That's not the reason. People did not, leave my membership program because they didn't like me personally. But we tend to connect those two dots even though they aren't always related. In fact, most of the time they're not related. When I had the Focus Photographer Lab membership for the last year and a half, before I decided to close it down, there were a lot of conversations I had because I really struggled with, why is this not working the way I envisioned it working? And why is this failing instead of succeeding? And I had moments where I took it as a personal attack on me. Well, I'm not good enough. I don't have enough information. I'm not knowledgeable enough. I'm not doing enough. I. When the reality is, if I took myself out of it, if it was someone else's business model that I was evaluating, I would not be looking at it as a reflection on them. I would not go to someone and say, well, it's probably just because you're a terrible educator. I would probably say it's a marketing issue, or it's a need issue, or it is all these other issues that have nothing to do with me as a person. And that is where, as small business owners, the idea of failure is so tied to our identity. We have to break that bond. We have to stop connecting those two dots because those two dots are not related. So when you put out that ad for your mini session and no one's booking them, it is not a reflection on you as a human, as a person, as a business owner. It is a reflection of your marketing strategy. It is a reflection of the need of your audience. It's a reflection of all these other things, but it is not about who you are as a person. Another reason that we, I think, focus on failure as a negative thing is we worry of how it's going to make us look to other people. Again, I'm going to go back to this idea of I recently closed down this membership and I struggled with this so much over the last several months. And one of the things I struggled with was, how is this going to look to my audience? How is this going to look to all the people that I, kind of bragged about this program to? How is this going to look to the rest of the world? And when I started worrying about that too much, it caused me to hold on to that thing way longer than I probably should have, because I was so afraid of what other people were going to think. I recently read the Mel Robbins book, Let Them. And this book, while the idea is not necessarily this huge new life-changing idea, it kind of is, but the stories behind how it works is really kind of what got me. It's the idea of we cannot control what other people are going to think. So stop trying to. Just focus on what is best for you. So in my case, I can't control what other people are going to see or think or dream up or say about me behind my back when I decide that something in my business isn't working. I cannot control what people are going to think, say, or do when I put out an offer that I think is really amazing. That's not my responsibility to worry about either. I have to let them. If they want to think negatively about me because something in my business didn't work and I decided to pivot, let them. If I want to put out 4 posts in a week about my mini sessions because I want as many people to see them as possible so they get booked, and some Karen on the internet thinks that I'm annoying, let her. That's fine. I can't change that. I can't control that. And I'm going to stop worrying about that, because that is failure in my mind, and I have to separate those things. It is not failure. It's one person's opinion, and that person's opinion I cannot be responsible for. So if failure in your mind is a fear because you're worried about how it's going to make you look or what people are going to think, the people that matter aren't going to think negatively about it, because they're going to know you. They're going to know the real reasons and the efforts and the purpose behind all the things that you've done. So don't let the fear of what some Karen, and I apologize if your name is Karen, that name really has gotten a bad rap, but don't let the fear of what someone on the internet or someone that doesn't know you is going to say, because it's not any of your business. You can't change it. You can't control it. So you just have to let them and focus on what's best for you. So how can we shift our mindset from this idea that failure is this bad thing to the idea that failure is just a way of collecting data and learning and growing and changing? I want you to think of these 3 questions. And I do this a lot with my kids, especially when they start to have anxiety or fear around something that's going on in their lives. The first question that I ask, and I want you to ask yourself, is what is the worst that could happen? Like, really think about it, and not these made up scenarios of the world's going to end and your life is over and you're going to go bankrupt and all these things. Like, realistically, logically, what is the worst that's going to happen? Because usually it's not nearly as bad as what we have in our heads. And so when you start to play out the scenarios of, yeah, okay, so I put out my mini sessions and nobody books them, or only 2 people book them, what's the worst that's going to happen? Okay, well, maybe I'm out a little bit of money because I rented a studio space. Okay, well, I could also maybe offer some kind of different session for other photographers to come and do headshots, or they could take over my space, or I could ask for a refund. Like, you start to really walk yourself through the scenarios and you're like, okay, that's really not as bad as maybe I had been feeling like it was going to be. When you start to play it out, it all seems just a little less overwhelming than it used to be. So that's the first question. What's the worst that could happen? Then I want you to flip it. I want you to think, what's the best that could happen? Like, what's the best case scenario? The best case scenario is I put out that offer for my mini sessions and they book up in like a day, and I have to actually add a second date because my wait list is so long. Like, I want you to go there as well. So I want you to go to both ends of the spectrum. What's the worst that could happen and what's the absolute ideal scenario? What's the best that could happen? And then I want you to ask yourself this third question, because this is really the question that's going to kind of shift that mindset. What's going to happen if I do nothing? If I take no action, what's going to happen? If I decide not to offer mini sessions, or I decide not to launch that program, or I decide not to put myself out there and go on a limb with a new idea that I have, I'm in the same place that I am right now. Does that make me feel good? Does that make me feel bad? Like, what actually is the real risk? Well, the real risk is not trying. It's not trying and failing. It's not doing anything at all and staying in the same position that you are in right now. So I want you to think of one thing that you've been avoiding, whatever that may be. It could be, I have been too afraid to post that one thing on social media. I've been too afraid to write a blog post. I've been too afraid to launch those mini sessions. I've been too afraid to change my pricing. I've been too afraid to start a YouTube channel. I've been too afraid to start a podcast. Whatever that thing is, big, small, medium, no matter what it is that you've been putting off because you're so afraid that it's going to fail, or you feel like you have to have all your ducks in a row, which is a whole nother conversation we'll get to another day. But whatever that thing is, I want you to take one action today, one thing that you can do today to move you forward. Okay. So if you've been putting off raising your prices, I want you today to sit down and map out what is it you want to raise your prices to, and how scary is it really? And go through those 3 questions. What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? And what happens if I do nothing? Okay. If you're avoiding launching a new offer, I want you today to sit down and map out what that new offer looks like, or create a plan for putting it out into the world, and go through those 3 questions. What's the worst that happened, the best that could happen, and what happens if I do nothing? So again, inaction is actually the fear. We're not afraid necessarily of the failure. The failure feels big and scary, but really the real fear is if we don't do anything, we never move forward from where we are right now in this moment. And I don't want you to be stuck in where you are in this moment, because you have amazing ideas, you have incredible inspirations, you have incredible things ahead of you in your business. And I don't want you to not accomplish those things or not see those things through because of these things that are holding you back. So as many times as you need to, go through those questions, go through those steps, re-listen to this episode if you need to, but don't let the fear of what other people think, don't let the fear of something not working out, don't let the fear of any of those other things stop you, because the only thing that matters is what you are doing in your own business, how you feel about the things that you're doing. Let that be the focus. All right, my friend, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in again this week. If you have enjoyed this episode or any of the other episodes you've listened to, I would love for you to take just a moment to leave a quick review, whether it is on iTunes, Spotify, Google, or even just sending me a message on Instagram or an email to let me know what you're loving about the show. It would make my absolute day. Thank you so much again for being here. And I will see you back here next week, same time, same place.